Hello and welcome back to the Tennessee Football Practice Facility. I'm Ryan Sylvia. This is Noah Taylor. We're with VolReport.com on the Rivals Network. Day 7 of Tennessee Fall Camp is in the books. Tomorrow night they'll hit Neyland Stadium for their first scrimmage of the fall, like a real under the lights of Neyland scrimmage. We'll talk to Josh Heupel afterwards, so if you want to stay updated for that, make sure you head over to VolReport.com. But today, we talked with wide receivers coach Kelsey Pope and then wide receiver Chaz Nimrod, and then also the trio of tight ends that Tennessee boasts this year, Miles Kitselman, Ethan Davis, and Holden Stays. So we're going to jump back and forth a little bit. We're going to start with the tight ends with you, Noah. What was your takeaway from the tight end group?
Yeah, I guess the first time since spring, obviously, we've talked to those guys. Holden Stays I thought was interesting was he was asked about maybe the transition from going to Notre Dame to here, the offense. You get a lot of questions about that when you're getting into this system. I thought it maybe bodes well for him and Tennessee that he said there wasn't a whole lot of differences in that adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that I thought was interesting too was the way those three guys have there seems like there's a genuine bond there. And you hear that throughout fall camp about position groups coming together. But I forgot who was asked. Maybe Kitselman was asked about the starting role, competing for that starting spot. And the way Tennessee utilizes the tight end, Kitselman kind of said that there's not really a competition for a starting spot. Everybody's going to get a chance to get out there, and three guys that seem pretty confident in their abilities. And obviously Josh Heupel's talked about it. Alec Ablin talked about it a couple weeks ago when we talked to him. Each guy kind of brings something different to that room, and obviously each guy's also improved on an area, maybe the blocking aspect of being out, playing out in space, stuff like that. But I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I'll flip it then to the wide receivers now. Kelsey Pope took the podium for the first time this fall. I asked him about kind of the depth that Tennessee has this year, because that's kind of what stands out is how deep this group is. And he said, yeah, since he's been at Tennessee, which he got officially that receiving, like the top of that receiving rung as well in the 2022 season.
Mm-hmm.
So, but he's been with the program since Heupel got here. He says it's the deepest that he's had at least here at Tennessee, and I think that really shows when you start to kind of go down the depth chart. And even when we're out there and maybe one guy today isn't practicing, well, you still look at the ones and the twos, and it's like it doesn't really feel like there's even that big of a loss necessarily when one or two guys aren't able to go, and that could play a big role. We saw last season there were so many injuries, different guys had to step up. You probably didn't imagine Caleb Webb and Chaz Nimrod having to play such a big role at times last season, but they did because of injuries. Not that Tennessee wasn't in a position to handle it last year, but I think they're in a really nice position to handle any injuries that may arise for this wide receiver room. He also kind of talked about how is it going to be tough to maybe find spots for guys? Like when you look at the X positions in specific, like you have Brew McCoy, you have Chris Brazel, you have Dante Thornton, like you go down the list and it's like, how are you going to get all these guys on the field? You talk about how so many of these guys need to know how to play different positions, and that could be the X and the Z. That could be Dante Thornton playing X on one drive, then flipping to the other side of the field and playing Z on the next. Or that could be a guy like Chaz Nimrod who plays inside in the slot and then can bounce outside and play outside. Or even he talked about Mike Matthews, how maybe he'll need to slide in it sometimes in the slot, but also he's primarily working on the outside. So Tennessee is not only deep, but they have a lot of guys that can play different positions as well. And overall, I think that bodes pretty well for that position group. We'll flip it back to the tight ends now. What else do you have?
Yeah, you talk about injuries. Ethan Davis was kind of that guy, that I know we talked about it kind of recently. Highly touted recruit coming in as a freshman, and then missed, I think, his whole senior year of high school, struggled with injuries the senior year, and then comes in here, makes a little bit of an impact in the spring and then deals with it himself. And I think that he was obviously in a more veteran group last year with Castles and Warren, but I think that played a little bit of a factor, trying to get healthy last year for him. So I think a big reason played a big role in him getting bigger. We talked about his weight gain and how he kind of emphasized being a guy in the box, being a guy that can block and make plays that way. Said he worked with Kitselman on that. He helped Kitselman kind of work on his outside game too, and being a pass catcher. Because I think obviously, that's something Davis brings is his ability to catch the ball and make plays in space. But one interesting quote was he said, as kind of a man, he took a little bit of a challenge. You don't want to be pushed into the backfield when you're blocking. I think that played a big kind of motivational role for him to put on some weight, and he certainly looks the part. So I think it's interesting, kind of going back to what we said a minute ago, that all three of those guys bring something different, but all three of them have kind of worked on a lot of things that makes them similar now, which I think helps.
Yeah, we'll talk about Chaz Nimrod now as he met with the media. Of course, if you look at his listed weight on the roster, it's a lot heavier than it was last year. And even Kelsey Pope talked about how he put on some muscle. When asked about his weight, though, Chaz Nimrod said he's playing at the same weight as last season, which that could still mean he put on muscle and kind of still transformed his body. But weight-wise, he says he's still kind of around that 195, 200 mark, I think was the ballpark that he gave. So then what's the biggest switch for him this year going to the third year? Kelsey Pope talked about how he kind of challenged him to play a little bit more violent and to really use some physicality that you see from some of these top-end SEC receivers, and how that's a contrast to kind of who Chaz Nimrod is off the field. You could tell talking to him, he's kind of maybe a more quieter, laid-back type of guy and not someone that's super, like, violent, what was the word that Kelsey Pope used. So asked about kind of flipping that switch, he said he's always been able to kind of do it. Maybe it's something that's being more focused on this year, but it's not really too much of a challenge for him, even though it's maybe not who he naturally is off the field. Being able to flip that switch and kind of play with that determination and that type of mentality doesn't seem too crazy for him to do, at least. It'll be interesting to see where he kind of fits in on this depth chart.
Yeah.
He's been taking most of his snaps that we've seen the open periods in the slot, usually that two guy behind Squirrel White, but as we saw and as we talked about, he can go out wide, and he's kind of been a jack of all trades for Tennessee. So he's going to play in some form or fashion. It'll be really nice to have a guy behind Squirrel too, because I think we saw at times last year where Tennessee got thin and Squirrel White really wasn't coming out of the games. Giving Squirrel White a blow and letting him maybe head to the sideline for a drive or some plays off and inserting Chaz Nimrod in there or inserting Braylon Staley or Mike Matthews or someone else on the roster, I think could be really nice for Squirrel White too, as he enters his junior season. That'll do it all for us here today from the Tennessee practice facility. Once again, scrimmage tomorrow night. If you want to know everything that Heupel said about that, stay on the VolReport YouTube channel, subscribe. Links to everything you need as far as volreport.com and our written content and the forum are in the description. Thank you for watching.